Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hagey Lecture. We're going to start things off, and I'm going to ask Vice President Academic and Provost Jim Rush to give us the opening remarks.
Thanks very much, Raheem, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work toward reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and it's centralized within the Office of Indigenous Relations. It's especially poignant, I think, to acknowledge this much longer history of the land on which we work, as we also celebrate one of the founders of this university in the short history of the university through this named lectureship for Dr. Hagey this evening. Tonight I have the pleasure of welcoming you, of course, to the University of Waterloo and the 2022 Hagey Lecture. From its founding, Waterloo has always defied tradition by integrating our academic and research excellence with work-integrated learning and with connections to society. As we remember and we re-embrace the foundation fostered by Dr. Hagey as one of the founders of this university and the first president of this university, we also realize that we are at a phase of what I might call a golden opportunity for reimagining ways to catalyze unconventional thinking. And that would apply to the way that we work, the way that we teach, the way that we learn, and the way that we discover. The Waterloo at 100 visioning exercise currently underway picks up on Hagey's unique vision by asking us to collectively imagine a bold future that addresses humanity's most important and pressing challenges through developing a longer-term vision that will address the fundamental question, what do we as an institution aspire to become by our 100th anniversary in 2057? The related question and action for us, of course, is what do we need to do internally to refresh and renew our processes in order to create the resilient UW of the future that will be needed to support that aspirational vision. The Hagey Lecture has been Waterloo's premier invitational public lecture since 1970. As we move into the next phase of Waterloo's development, it's essential to take hold of all of the opportunities we can to hear innovative, challenging, and creative ideas. I'm absolutely sure that some of those will come out of tonight's lecture. So once again, thank you and welcome to the University of Waterloo.
Thank you, Jim. So welcome, everyone, to the Hagey Lecture. My name is Raheem Musa. I'm a professor in the Department of Pure Mathematics, and I'm the current chair of the Hagey Lecture Committee. As you heard, the lecture was established in 1969, 1970. It was the first lecture in honor of one of the founders and first president of the university, J.G. Hagey. And its purpose is to bring to the University of Waterloo and to the wider KW community each year an outstanding individual who has distinguished themselves in some area of scholarly or creative endeavor and whose work has profound implications on the intellectual discourse of our times. Underlying this year's Hagey Lecture is the conviction that that intellectual discourse must include the arts, culture, and the humanities. The knowledge inherent in these disciplines is all too often undervalued by a society focused on economic growth and technological progress. It is important that academia maintain continuous and meaningful conversations with art and culture leaders outside the walls of the university. And today's lecture is part of that conversation. I would now like to call on Dean Sheila Ager, of the Faculty of Arts, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Raheem. Well, good evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce this evening's speaker, Antoni Cimolino. We're actually welcoming him back to Waterloo tonight. Long, long ago, in the years BP, before the pandemic, Waterloo conferred on him the degree of D.Lit, Doctor Literarum, Doctor of Letters. At that point, however, in 2019, he was already a doctor, having received an honorary Doctor of Humanities degree from his alma mater, the University of Windsor, in 2004. These honorary degrees mark a desire on the part of institutions such as ours to recognize and celebrate the achievements of those who've made noteworthy contributions to our world. As you all know, Dr. Cimolino is currently the Artistic Director of the Stratford Festival, Canada's largest nonprofit arts organization, a role in which he has served for the past decade. He began his career at Stratford as an actor in 1988, appearing in several plays each season. His first leading role was as Romeo in the 1992 production of Romeo and Juliet, but even before that, he had dipped his toe into directorial waters. In 1995, he made his full directorial debut with The Merry Wives of Windsor, and he's never looked back. In the current season, he's directed both Richard III and Molière's The Miser, and in the coming year, he'll be directing Grand Magic by Eduardo de Filippo. Dr. Cimolino's significant contributions to Stratford's artistic mission include his own work as actor and director, of course, but it is the immense leadership and generosity he has shown in nurturing, sustaining, and promoting the artistry of others that we recognize and celebrate. Prior to his current position as artistic director, Dr. Cimolino served sequentially as Stratford's general manager, general director, and executive director. While in these roles, he oversaw the successful establishment of a festival stability fund, as well as a multi-million-dollar endowment foundation. He's been instrumental in sustaining and growing the festival's physical infrastructure, including the extensive renovations of the Avon Theatre and the construction of the Studio Theatre. And when he first became artistic director in 2013, Dr. Cimolino founded the Stratford Festival Laboratory, which describes itself as the festival's research and development wing. Dr. Cimolino's contributions are not limited only to the Stratford Festival, as impressive as those achievements are. He was the founding national chair of Culture Days, a Canadian celebration of arts and culture. He has initiated collaborations with several prestigious theatre companies in Canada and the United States, and he also spearheaded the Stratford Festival's involvement in a joint project with CUSO International to establish a performing arts and educational center in El Salvador. For his energetic, innovative, and generous leadership in the field of the Canadian arts over the decades, in 2015, Dr. Cimolino was named to the Order of Canada, an honor reserved to those who make extraordinary contributions to the nation. I'm going to throw a little more Latin at you. The motto of the Order of Canada is Desiderantes Meliorem Patriam, desiring a better country. In a media interview at the time, Dr. Cimolino expressed a personal view that meshes seamlessly with that motto. What matters is to be able to say at the end of your life, you left things better than you found them. In tonight's lecture, Holding the Mirror Up to Nature, he asks, how do storytelling and play acting make our lives better? So without much further ado, although certainly not about nothing, please join me in welcoming Dr. Antoni Cimolino.
That's good. You made me laugh. That's good. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Sheila and Jim and Rahim, for those generous comments and introduction and for having me here tonight. And thank you all for coming through the sleet and the hail and the rain and the snow and everything, that all the seasons that we're getting right at this moment. So when I was asked to do this Hagey Lecture, I looked up the list of prior lectures, and there's some pretty good names there. I mean, they got the good people. I feel very sorry for you. So, I think they might have, is there like a Antoni Cimolino who's an astrophysicist or something? Or was there some confusion? So at first I really honestly didn't think I would do this. But then, I thought a little bit about the times that we're in right now, this moment where we are coming back after this long period of social isolation. And I realized, no, I do want to speak to you. I want to speak to you about the art form that I love, that I've, worked during my life to promote. I want to talk to you about its beauty. I want to talk to you about its madness. I want to talk to you about its mystery. And, why do we do what we do? And why does it exist at all? And I guess I want to implore you after this period where we've lost our theaters for so long to not take it for granted, to come back. And I guess I'm hoping that in sharing some of my passion, it may spark some passion in some of you. So the somewhat lofty title of this address comes, of course, from Hamlet. And by the way, we have an excellent production just down the road for another 2 weeks. It didn't take me long to get to a bit of advertising. I suppose if Netflix can do it. It comes at a moment when Hamlet, Prince Hamlet, is talking to a group of players and explaining to them why they do what they do, in case they didn't know. And artists are used to the condescension of the powerful, and compared to some of the other things powerful people can do to you, condescension's pretty good. And so the actors listen. They're probably flattered that he has any theories about theater. I mean, I can just imagine Prince Charles at the RSC, right? And so they listen, and he tells them, suit the action to the word to the action. With this special observance that you o'erstep not the modesty of nature. For anything so o'erdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is, to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. Now, the word nature comes up more than once in his talk about their practicing their art. And art, remember, is by definition artificial. It's not found in nature. It's the creation of a human mind. But these two things, art and nature, complement each other in a kind of dynamic tension. And I believe that tension can yield more beauty than you can find in either of them alone. Hamlet is, among other things, suggesting that the actor reflect human nature and the world around them as truthfully as possible. But why do we as humans bother with play acting at all? I mean, reflecting, holding a mirror up to nature, some would argue there's nothing more unnatural. I mean, consider the act of going to a theater. You stream into a confined space, one person after another, often in large numbers, and you sit down, all facing in the same direction, and you, as the lights come down on you, and you're all facing either a stage or a curtain in front of the stage, and eventually lights come down on you, and you're supposed to be absolutely quiet and ignore the person beside you, which is never easy. And then the lights come up on the stage, and a group of people that we don't know pretend to be people that they are not, and we know they're not who they claim to be, and that nothing they say is factually true, but we try to believe them. And we pay attention to them while they ignore us. And for this pleasure, we pay money. You see, unnatural. On the other hand, consider for a moment a small child, maybe 3, 4 years old, not quite having gone to school yet. Can you, in your mind's eye, imagine that child playing with another child? Okay, what are they doing? They're likely not playing chess. They're likely not playing an organized sport. They're probably play acting. And they will do this sometimes with puppets or dolls, often with not. And they will be finding ways to act out a situation. Sometimes those situations are exciting. Sometimes they're mundane. It really doesn't matter. They're fully immersed in that role playing. And sometimes there are disagreements between them, but they usually work it out. No one wins in this game, and yet all gain by it. Is it taught? No. It's as natural to them as sleeping and eating. As a matter of fact, if you really want to get into trouble, try interrupting them and undermining their joint fiction. I'm a mommy, this is my baby, we're going shopping, and you say, no, this is the sofa in our living room and your baby's our dog. You will get a good dose of cold water for your efforts. And they imitate not only actions and stories, but also character types and emotions. And in doing so, they entertain themselves, but they also learn to get along. And they practice what are to them very interesting situations. They are preparing themselves for the future by reflecting the world and the people around them, to which you would say, but of course, nothing could be more natural. And in one form or another, we never really stop. We may do it ourselves by playing games, role-playing games, cosplay, or perhaps we're in person or through avatars doing that, or we may like to watch others in films, on stage, and we lose ourselves in the story, perhaps imagining ourselves as the hero, but certainly feeling empathy for the characters and fearing for them, laughing, delighting in their success. Why? Well, the more cynical among us would say, it's simply entertainment. Perhaps it's silly, but it's fun. It's certainly not of any practical importance and doesn't bear much thought and certainly shouldn't be the subject of a lecture. Well, I'd agree with most of that, especially the last part. But if playing were simply about entertainment, why do the best plays always center on conflict? There can be singing or dancing, but without conflict, we quickly lose interest. A drama, as George Bernard Shaw said, is only as good as its antagonist. And if that antagonist is resourceful and surprising and truly committed to destroying the dreams of the protagonist, well, then we're riveted. But why? Why should we care about a fiction, a series of falsehoods that are being played out in front of us? And why are the greatest stories, the greatest plays, always about families? If the only reason to go to an entertainment is entertainment, well, couldn't we simply see a group of unconnected people singing and dancing together? And that might be called a revue, and some people might like that, but it won't hold your attention nearly as much as a fully developed musical, or a comedy, or a tragedy, or a play that has all those elements like Fiddler on the Roof. A family has to face not only poverty, but the violence of the program. They hold on to each other to endure and to hold on to their traditions and move to be able to survive. The focus on conflict and the family goes back to the very earliest texts we have. As a matter of fact, the earliest texts we have, the Persians by Aeschylus, which won the first prize in the Athens City Dionysia Festival in 472 BC, 26 centuries ago. Now, you may ask yourself, what can a play written so long ago have to say to us today? Well, it seems a lot. The story is about the great superpower of the time, Persia, and a major defeat that they suffered only 8 years before. The unlikely winners of that battle 8 years before at Salamis were the Greeks themselves, a small series of loosely allied city-states, the chief of which, Athens, had just undertaken this crazy experiment in government called democracy. The writer, Aeschylus, was himself a soldier, a general, had fought at a previous battle, also a Greek victory, at Marathon, also against the Persians, and may have been present at Salamis. Well, okay, a surprise Greek victory over a great superpower, a David and Goliath story. So you think for sure it must be a story of triumph, perhaps some chest beating. It could be forgiven for being self-congratulatory. And yet nothing could be further from the truth. It is told from the point of view of the Persian royal family. as more and more bad news comes to them from the battlefield. A chorus of old men, which sets the scene, is then followed by the Queen Mother, the mother of the soon-to-be defeated King Xerxes of Persia, revealing her fears as she recounts her dreams. And then a messenger arrives from the battle who describes in gory detail the devastating defeat, the Persian generals who have been slaughtered, and that Xerxes himself has escaped and is returning. The messenger ends by quoting the battle cry of the Greeks. On, sons of Greece, set free your fatherland, set free your children, wives, places of your ancestral gods and tombs of your ancestors, forward for all. After the Greeks defeated Persia at Marathon, Xerxes was determined to teach them a lesson. And so he amassed an enormous army of mercenaries and slaves which crossed Asia en masse and were determined to punish the Greeks. And then things went sideways. As we hear of the horrible losses, we feel for Xerxes' mother, and his father, Darius, shows up as a ghost and points out his son's arrogance, which has led to the defeat. Now, this is not unlike a battle that's going on today. For Xerxes, you could substitute the name Putin. And for the battle cry of the Greeks, you could substitute a Greek call to free their children. Aeschylus was warning his fellow Athenians against arrogance and overconfidence that the Persians exhibited. And, like most soldiers who experienced battle, he was also anti-war. It is a message for our times from 2,600 years ago. But the first time I saw this play, it had a somewhat different meaning. I saw it in the months after 9/11 in Lower Manhattan, just meters away from the World Trade Center. And at that moment, it was very clear that this was an American production saying to America, do not become overconfident. Now, 20 years later, after Afghanistan and Iraq, we can judge whether or not that advice was heeded. You see, good plays hold the mirror up to nature. Their meanings change as time goes on. New plays can reflect the world that we live in today. Old plays tell us we have done this before. Now, theater, as we know, came to us from the ancient Greeks, and the first play we possessed was preceded by many others that we lost. And it was followed by many more comedies and tragedies that examine our world really without sentiment or nostalgia for the most part. They did as Hamlet advised. They held the mirror up to nature. And as times change, but people don't tend to, they reflect us now as they did the world then. But why did the Greeks do that? Now, while the Dionysia Festival was a religious festival dedicated to the god of wine and theater, it would not be considered religious in any modern sense. Now, in some plays, such as Aristophanes' The Frogs, Dionysus himself is lampooned. The role of theater seemed more connected to the idea of developing communal values and cohesion within a state that was the first democracy. In laughing together, people would decide communally what is ridiculous, what is contemptible. And in crying, they would recognize the pain of tragic miscalculation and human fallibility. But over the course of a dramatic festival, they would come together in spirit and understanding. And the stories were usually about current events and laid out a very complicated and contradictory landscape. If the law in Greece was about clarity, the theater was the place to explore ambiguity. And people would do this together. They would look at these complex stories and contradictory values together. And they were expected to participate in some way, to support the festival and certainly to attend. It's said that when they attended, they would find a coin on their seat to offset the lost wages that they had experienced that day. And they were encouraged to not only see the plays, but to participate in some way at some point in their lives. It is said that you could determine the population of an ancient Greek town by the size of the theater when it was built, which would be equivalent to about 10% of the adult male population, so that over the course of 10 feast days, the entire population could come through and see the plays. And as the idea of democracy was new, they realized that it would require effort to build community, to create trust, to develop understanding. And theater was their way to do that. Okay, but why theater? What can it do that a lecture or a newspaper or a book can't, and why? Now, before I attempt to answer that question, let's hold the mirror up to the world as it is today. Let's look at our world and what we've experienced over the last couple of years. Over the last couple of years, we've seen the outbreak of a deadly pandemic that transformed all of our lives in ways where we could never have anticipated. Even as we are still catching our breath from the shocks of Brexit and the election of Donald Trump. We've seen absurd but dangerous conspiracy theories spread like wildfire through social media. Social media, something that didn't exist 20 years before. We've seen assaults on liberal democracies we never thought to witness. Insurrectionists storming Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and blockading Parliament Hill in Ottawa. We've begun to experience firsthand the devastating effects of global warming, devastating storms, droughts, heat waves, floods. And we've been warned bluntly by climate scientists that it may already be too late to stop this runaway train. We've seen inflation and supply chain issues send our costs of living soaring sky high. And most alarmingly of all, we've seen a nuclear-armed adversary launch the worst crisis in Europe since the Second World War. I promise you the speech gets cheerier. We've seen the status quo challenged in other ways that, appalling in themselves, may more hopefully be considered as long overdue wake-up calls that could ultimately lead to a better world. The murder of George Floyd in 2020 prompted organizations and institutions around the world, including our own at Stratford, to apply scrutiny not only to their practices and policies, but also to the unspoken, perhaps even unconscious assumptions that contribute to systemic racism. And here in Canada, the discovery of the unmarked graves of hundreds of Indigenous children who had died in residential schools has brought the term cultural genocide to our own doorstep and demanded that some kind of reckoning take place. So, to say that we live in turbulent times is an understatement. And some of the forces that have created that turbulence will seek to amplify it or manipulate it to their own benefit, to harden attitudes and beliefs among the public. Putin's Russia will use medias of all kinds and state organizations to prove the rightness of Russia's historic claim over the Ukraine. Donald Trump and the MAGA movement will continue to try to convince Republicans and others that the recent presidential election was stolen. The resource industry will try to convince us that climate change is a distant and it's a very solvable problem, and they are a vital part of the solution. As Mark Twain said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. By selective use of some of the facts, they can articulate a plausible position that will seek to convince you, but it will happily settle for a confusion that leads to indifference and inaction. Often, they're able to bring credence and some respectability to the ideas that are simply incredible. And the best defense against this kind of propaganda, of course, is a good liberal education. The liberal arts enable us not only to learn important skills and knowledge and methods of problem solving, they help us understand human nature with skepticism, with humility, and with imagination. You know, from the pages of a personal essay or a fiction, we can better understand each other's thoughts and our desires and our fears and our aspirations. But like most things on a page, it's only two dimensions. Theater adds the vital third dimension. It brings a kind of human factor that has a secret psychological power. Because unlike reading or writing, you see, we're hardwired to play act. and to not only enjoy, but to be drawn into the play acting of others. By watching and listening to a story on stage, especially with live actors, we not only better understand a given situation, and remember that all of these situations are about conflict. We not only understand, we empathize. And if the play is a good play, we empathize with nuance, realizing why the two opposing sides are at each other and perhaps can't understand each other. This can be done through comedy, which enables us to laugh at situations on stage that certainly wouldn't be funny if they happened to us in our real lives. Or they might happen through tragedy, where we feel for an individual who's undone by their own mistakes, understandings, or flaws. The play's the thing, says Hamlet, with which we'll catch the conscience of the king. The power of the theater is to create empathetic understanding, and good theater makes us ask questions of ourselves and of those around us. Good theater does not preach or tell you what to do or think or feel. It subtly moves you off of a position of certainty about the thing that you're witnessing and moves you into the most appropriate and common and truthful human condition, the one we live mostly with, which is uncertainty. And the fact that what is being said on stage is not to be trusted is part of its power. You see, we're tricked into wanting to suspend our disbelief, but we can't completely suspend our disbelief. And so we watch the situations on stage, we both feel and we remain unmoved. So we believe in the situation, and yet we always remain somewhat skeptical. And in most cases for people, that kind of ambivalence is really hard to take. It's uncomfortable. We prefer certainty, so much so that you can see people jumping in with both feet to certain positions and opinions, especially given social media, which serves to reinforce our beliefs and dislikes and biases. You know, there was a time in the United States when polling showed that people would become quite uncomfortable when one of their children married into a family that practiced another religion. Over time, that's changed. But now polling shows that a family will become quite uncomfortable when their son or daughter marry into a family from another political party. People are moving to other states in the United States, not only based on their retirement plans or jobs or tax situation, but to be near people who share their own views and social values. The next civil war there will probably have quite a configuration of states that won't be as simple as north-south. We want to be near people who buttress our way of thinking. And perhaps this is a reaction to the uncertainty of our times and of life itself. But this hardening of opinions is not good for a society that needs to share resources and space and make decisions together for the good of all. From the Persians to the latest plays today, theater artists tend to push back against the powerful and against commonly held position. That's why over time, so many of them have wound up in jail. Now, Shakespeare was the only writer of any stature at his time that did not end up in jail. They all wound up in jail, but William Shakespeare. He probably came close one time to going to jail. But by setting his plays at distant times, different countries, he managed to avoid detection of his subversive message. But I think it was more than simply deception that kept him free. It was his inability to believe in any single solution, politics or ideology, in order to solve problems. And nor did he seem to believe that the world's problems could be blamed on any single force or person. You know, Denmark may be a prison, but you can see clearly that everybody had a hand in building that prison. And while the children may be innocent for a while, by the end of the play, they've outdone their parents in murders. I think this state of contradiction and ambiguity in the theater is enhanced by the practices of the theater itself, and how and why we do what we do. You see, we play for a living. We play seriously. And we're very practical about it all, you know. I mean, I can tell you right now, the Stratford Festival, we know exactly what we will be doing on this night next year in each one of our theaters, in each one of our rehearsal halls. You know, barring a pandemic, we're there for you. Now, try getting your kitchen renovated and see who's flaky and temperamental. We take the unrealistic, we take the artificial, and we make it tangible. And that's true at the core of our work. You know, our props makers make dross look like gold. Our sound and lighting designers delight, but they deceive your eyes and ears. And our actors make you believe their fictions. The ancient Greeks called actors hypocrites, which means an interpreter from underneath. And given that they were wearing large masks, that kind of makes sense. And over time, the word then became changed to mean someone who pretends to be good or pious in order to deceive. But the actor, of course, has the moral high ground here because we are telling you that we're lying to you, unlike some politicians or the financial services industry. Actors and theater people live in a land of the magic if, of Stanislavski's magic if, which he used as a tool for actor training. The word if enables us to set aside our reservations about believing something and play a game based upon supposition. You know, now, if this were true, I would do the following. If that were true, they might feel this way. If gives permission to the imagination. If does not ask for certainty or commitment. And by giving over temporarily to the if, well, we can play act. Shakespeare in his play As You Like It has his clown Touchstone talk about the rules of quarreling. And as he lays out the rules of quarreling, he also praises the power of the word if. Touchstone says, "Oh, sir, we quarrel in print by the book, as you have books for good manners. I will name you the degrees. The first, the retort, courteous. The second, the quip, modest. The third, the reply, churlish. The fourth, the reproof, valiant. The fifth, the countercheck, quarrelsome. The sixth, the lie, with circumstance. The seventh, the lie, direct. All of these you may be able to avoid, but the lie direct." And you can avoid that too with an if. I knew when 7 justices could not take up a quarrel, but when the parties were met themselves, one of them thought but of an if, as if you said so, then I said so. And they shook hands and swore brothers. Your if is your only peacemaker, much virtue in if. Well, Shakespeare could well have been a diplomat. But making light of the situation, it is the if, the what if, that enables us to question, to explore, to wonder about another person's motives, their situation, their understandings. It is a key not only to the imagination, but to empathetic understanding. It enables us to see feelingly, as the blinded Gloucester says in Lear. Now, those who wish to foment division cannot stand the suggestion of middle ground or of a peacemaker like if. In Richard III, which is still on, and it's a very good production, which I directed myself, on for another 2 weeks. Sure. In Richard III, Tricky Dicky wants to draw his former ally, William Hastings, into a quarrel in order to have him executed. And so he makes up this absurd accusation that Queen Elizabeth and Hastings' mistress, Jane Shore, have used witchcraft to wither his arm, which we all know has been withered from birth. And Hastings thinks quickly, and he uses Touchstone's advice and employs the if. He says, "If they have done this, my gracious lord," and Richard is having none of that, and he shuts that down brutally. "If, thou protector of this damned strumpet, tellest thou me of ifs? Thou art a traitor. Off with his head." One is put in mind of that televised cabinet meeting. Remember the one before the start of the Ukraine war where where Putin was asking his cabinet whether they thought they should go into Ukraine or not, and his intelligence chief seemed to be prevaricating a little bit, and before too long, he was forced to eat his own words in a panic. We're very fortunate that William Shakespeare was able to write and create theater in a dynamic, if horrific, moment in history. The 16th century started with Europe's discovery and exploitation of the Americas, the growing use of the printing press, the early days of modern banking in Italy that transformed the agrarian economies of Europe, and most important, really, for the next century, the Reformation. When Europe for centuries had agreed on one Christian God, there now were at least two, and blood flowed in the streets and on the battlefields. By the late 16th century, exhaustion was beginning to take hold, and a new distrust of dogma grew. Montaigne, in his exploration of the personal essay, began an openness to self-examination and trust in one's own senses, which would then flower in the work of Francis Bacon and Galileo, albeit in the scientific area. But on stage, Shakespeare was indebted to Montaigne and to his gentle, free thinking. He even quotes Montaigne's essay of the cannibals in The Tempest, in which the Lord Gonzalo describes his view of utopia, which is lifted liberally from Montaigne. And as he describes his view of utopia, there are two other characters on the stage at the same time heckling him and ridiculing every word he has to say. So you see, Shakespeare, through his characters, lets us examine right and wrong through our own minds, not as set out by church or state. As Hamlet says, there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Well, you may be saying, in the face of all this turbulence, well, how can the theater make a difference? What guidance can it give us? To which I would have to say none. What prescriptions, what actions can it prescribe? I'd have to say none. And this is very frustrating for people who know the power of theater as a persuasive device, because they go, well, why isn't it more didactic? Why isn't it teaching lessons? Why isn't it telling people what to do? Because as soon as it starts doing that, its power disappears. You know, bad art is filled with noble sentiments. But people don't really want to take that as an answer. You know, I have people who come up to me all the time and they say, you know, can you give us some inspirational themes or quotes from Shakespeare? And I love that question because it helps us begin to understand Shakespeare's mystery. Because, you know, he doesn't do inspirational quotes. And yet, during dark times, we seem to turn to William Shakespeare. I found it kind of wonderful, but very odd, that at the beginning of the pandemic, the play that everybody was talking about was King Lear, right? And this was on the Twitter sphere, and we streamed our 2014 production with Colin Fior around the world. And, you know, just recently, there was a production of Lear and a sister piece based upon Lear called Goneril by wonderful Canadian playwright Aaron Shields at Soul Pepper. And next year, we're going to be doing King Lear again. And why, in such dark and dangerous times, do we want to see such a painful tragedy? You know, are there uplifting, are there inspirational quotes or lessons or themes that can be gleaned from it? I'm made to think of a line from Lear, "The weight of this sad time we must obey." You know, it comes at the very end of the play. When Lear is dead, his 3 daughters are dead, his fool is dead, the blinded Earl of Gloucester is dead, the wicked Edmund and Duke of Cornwall are both dead, and the loyal Earl of Kent, well, he has just declared all's cheerless, dark, and deadly, and has announced his intention to die of a broken heart, or perhaps his own hand. And summing it all up, Edgar concludes the play by saying, "The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. And on that happy note, the audience goes reeling out of the auditorium, stunned by their 3 hours immersion in a world of suffering, in a universe seemingly devoid of reason or meaning, never mind divine justice. As Gloucester remarks, after having had his eyes gouged out on stage, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. He also says, in one of the play's several allusions to communicable diseases, "'Tis the time's plague when madmen lead the blind." Later on, Gloucester and Lear, the latter driven mad by the catastrophic collapse of his retirement plans, commiserates on the absurdity of the human condition. When we are born, says Lear, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools. So in King Lear, at least, Shakespeare doesn't exactly urge us to look on the bright side of life. And if we consider the rest of his tragedies, well, the best message we can derive from them seems to be, when things look really bad, they can always get worse. But you may justifiably point out, well, hold it. Shakespeare also wrote other plays besides tragedies. I mean, what about something like Henry V? You know, there has to be some inspiring stuff on that, doesn't there? You know, once more, unto the breach, dear friends, once more. Well, yeah, Henry does have a flair with rhetoric, and he's undeniably good at rallying his soldiers. But he's also a ruthless warmonger who threatens atrocities against women and children. Your naked infants spitted upon pikes, and kills his prisoners. It's a bit of a war criminal, actually. And for the rest of the histories, well, perhaps we can best sum up their themes in a well-known line from Henry IV, Part 2. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. Or this from Richard II. For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. Okay, what about Shakespeare's comedies? There's got to be inspiration in there, positive thinking themes that'll help us through these tough times. Well, The Taming of the Shrew, anyone? Merchant of Venice? Okay, As You Like It, Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night. Those look more promising, right? Shakespeare's romantic comedies are about people pairing off in the eternal dance of love and procreation, which is generally considered a good thing. The lovers face obstacles to their union, of course. Disapproving parents, perhaps, or their own mixed up emotions, or the guy's failure to recognize the girl because she's dressed as a boy. But after a lot of comic confusion with some funny gags along the way, those obstacles are overcome and everyone ends up more or less happy, except, Malvolio or Shylock. So yes, Shakespeare's comedies generally send us out feeling chirpier than we do coming out of King Lear or Titus Andronicus. But can we draw inspiring themes from them? I mean, basically, their central idea is what Benedict says in Much Ado About Nothing. The world must be peopled, which when you think about it is maybe not that far off from King Lear's heavily sardonic, let copulation thrive. In short, if we want hopeful one-liners to cheer us up, we'll have a hard time finding them in Shakespeare's plays. It may seem surprising that perhaps our greatest playwright has left us so poorly supplied with uplifting sentiments. But that's because he was writing plays and not greeting cards. Characters in plays pursue agendas and utter speeches that have everything to do with furthering their own interests and fulfilling their own desires, and very little to do with making us feel better about ourselves. Even their soliloquies are purposeful. In each case, a character in a specific situation is sorting out his thoughts or feelings so that they can take their next step. Here's a famous example. Should I go on being, or should I kill myself now? Oblivion must be better than putting up with slings and arrows and fardels and all the rest of it. But what about afterwards? What if there's an afterlife? What if it's even worse? I better think this through again. All right, I've dispirited all of us long enough. Let me now declare that, of course, I wouldn't be here talking to you today if I certainly didn't believe that, we do derive immense inspiration from the plays of Shakespeare. Of course we do. We just don't get it in an obvious kind of, golden words to live by kind of way. And at the Stratford Festival, we saw that inspiration happen in the spring of summer of 2020 as we presented a series of online screenings of the 12 films that we'd made of our Shakespeare productions over the past several seasons. We started off with King Lear, and then by the time the series was done, it had attracted 1.2 million viewers from around the world. And they came from over 60 countries, and only just over half were from English-speaking countries. After that, the greatest group was from India, and after that, Germany. And as the coronavirus kept us terrified and huddled in our homes, the world seemingly melting down around us, who would have thought that people would want to turn on their TVs to watch something like King Lear? And yet, there it is. We do turn to Shakespeare in times of trouble, in times of need. Something about these plays offer us a foundation, something strong to stand on to help us cope with adversity. So how does this work? Earth to earth, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. I suspect that whatever faith you subscribe to or don't, you will recognize those words. They're spoken at Anglican funerals, and they're part of a ritual. Rituals are communal acts in which individuals come together to undergo certain prescribed experiences. Specific words are spoken, time-honored phrases that may well sound familiar in our ears. Far from diminishing their effect, that familiarity is part of their power. They come to us like friends in a time of need. The words themselves don't necessarily have comforting or inspirational things to say. Rather, they speak truths about our condition, our humanity. But while those truths may be hard, the formal beauty with which they're expressed transcends raw emotion, imbuing it with solemnity, with dignity, with grace, and elevating the purely personal into the realm of the universal. The funeral service words I just quoted, for instance, resonate with us all because, we all know that one day, sooner or later, each and every one of us is going to turn to dust and ashes. If it be not now, yet it will come. That last line, by the way, isn't from the Book of Common Prayer, it's from Hamlet. But it wouldn't sound out of place in a religious ritual, and that's no accident, and not just because Shakespeare's language is the language of the King James Bible. Robertson Davies, writing about the Stratford Festival's first season in 1953, reminded us, and I quote, that the first theaters were temples, and that the theater at its highest is still a temple, sacred to gods of pity, terror, tenderness, and mirth. Experiencing that kind of theater, he went on to suggest, is akin to participating in a kind of secular ritual. For what is ritual, he wrote, but conventions of gesture, movement, and dance performed within a prescribed area in order to evoke the essence of something much greater than ourselves. And it is in that communal evocation of something greater than our individual selves that we find solace in times of hardship. In Shakespeare's Richard III, the Duchess of York asks an interesting question. Why should calamity be full of words? And Queen Elizabeth, the widow of King Edward, replies in part, let them have scope, though what they will impart help nothing else, yet they do ease the heart. Words matter to us. When tragedies happen in real life, when a friend is in distress, our impulse is to reach for words, even though we may not know anything to say, or that anything that we are likely to say will likely sound trite or banal. We fall back on, I don't know what to say, apologizing for our lack of words. And that's why ritual means so much to us. It supplies us with the tried and tested words we need to confront and to come to terms with things that we ourselves can barely express. In just the same way, we find solace even in a play as bleak in its outlook as King Lear. The words of a Shakespearean tragedy resonate with us much in the same way as the words of a funeral service. The words of a Shakespearean comedy, like those of a marriage service, connect us to all the other human beings throughout history who have declared their love for each other. In both cases, the more familiar the words, the more resonance they seem to acquire. The late Richard Minette, who was our artistic director at the festival for 14 years, recalled a striking remark that was made to him by his fellow actor, Nicholas Pennell, and some of you may know that they alternated the part of Hamlet. Nicholas was a beloved presence on our stage for many years, and at this moment, Nicholas was dying, and what he said was, "Well, Richard, at least we got to say those words." Well, right now, we need those words more than ever. After this period of profound separation and isolation, as we go through war, climate change, and social conflict, we also have experienced a plague. And Shakespeare knew about that kind of danger. Plague shut down the theaters of his time as COVID-19 did ours, and it haunts his writing. He didn't write directly about it as a subject, perhaps because in an era when people tended to view plague as a punishment from God, it would seem unwise to raise too many questions about it. Nor does plague play a significant role in his plots, with that one exception in Romeo and Juliet, that an important message doesn't get delivered because the messenger is in quarantine. But the idea of infectious disease constantly hovers in the background of his plays, not only in figures of speech, a plague of both your houses, and imagery, a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors, but as a real everyday danger. In Julius Caesar, Portia asks her husband Brutus why he has risen from his wholesome bed to dare the vile contagion of the night. Well, it's a metaphor for evil. In tragic drama, death, the ultimate evil, perpetuates itself through the body of a play like a virus. A murder, let's say, incites revenge, and that revenge claims other victims along the way, including generally the avenger as well. The difference in life and death, as Hamlet says, the difference is between being and not being. And that idea of not being is our plague that lurks in the background of our minds, the annihilation of the self, our reduction to nothing. And that word, nothing, that echoes again and again through King Lear. It's all the more terrifying there because it hints at a universal nothingness, an absence of compassion or even of meaning in the cosmos. You know, in some ways, we find ourselves living in a King Lear universe. And so we turn to words that help us confront the idea of nothingness. To put that idea into words is to gain a modicum of power over it. You know, I joked earlier that the ultimate theme of Shakespearean tragedy is that things can always get worse. Well, in King Lear, Gloucester's son, Edgar, says exactly that. And worse I may be yet. The worst is not, so long as we can say this is the worst. On one level, Edgar is saying that if you can still speak, you're not dead yet, you're still breathing, so you could be dead. But perhaps there's another more interesting idea in those words. Perhaps Shakespeare's suggesting that the last thing that stands between us and the bottom of the abyss is the power of words, the ability unique to our species to say something about our condition. There may be senselessness around us, but by ordering it into the forms of art, by putting it into words of sublime power and beauty, we gain strength and we bring our own meaning to the random flux of existence. And that ultimately is why we watch tragedies. Characters in tragedies enact our worst fears. They get reduced to very little. But even when they die, they don't get reduced to absolute zero. We still have their words to cling to, words that transcend human mortality. And that's true not only of the grandly tragic characters like Cleopatra, who comes out with lines like, "I have immortal longings in me," but it's also true of the most ridiculous figures in Shakespeare. People like the cowardly braggart Parolles in All's Well That Ends Well, who says, "Even the thing I am shall make me live. The fact that we can declare who we are, that we can speak what we feel, in Edgar's words, redeems us from annihilation. However great the destructive forces arrayed against us, human beings are never ultimately nothing. However low we might be, we are something. We come away from a tragedy with a keener understanding of what our own destruction could be like. But we also come away with a sense that it doesn't make us any less than we are. It can sometimes make us more, especially when it involves some degree of sacrifice. Our lives can end in so many arbitrary, meaningless ways. Pandemic, war, accident, natural disaster, and all the other natural shocks that flesh is heir to. But by confronting our mortality through art, by watching with empathy as characters are reduced by the disastrous situations of tragic drama, we derive comfort and, yes, inspiration from the assurance that we are not alone and we are not nothing. To engage together in the ritual that is performance of a great play, we declare the significance of our humanity. We place ourselves, our consciousness, our emotion, our spirits at the center of the universe. And above all in theater, as in ritual, we do this in the company of others. The words of a play are spoken by living, breathing human beings sharing a space with an audience. People on the stage, people in the auditorium, we're all participants in the communal experience. Now, before I close, I'd like to just go over a few points I hope that I've been able to make with you tonight, and then tell a short personal story. What I wanted to say tonight is that play acting in theater is not strange, it's not exotic, it's not elite. Nothing is more natural. Because we're hardwired to use play and theater as a learning tool. Theater is about asking questions and navigating ambiguity. And the questions it raises can bring deeper understanding of others and create empathy, something that we sorely need right now. Therefore, it is an antidote to the isolation and anger caused by social media. Therefore, theater is vital to democracy. On a personal level, through ritual and the beauty of language, theater can give meaning to the seemingly irrational elements in human existence, in our own lives. And maybe the one point I haven't made and should have spent more time on was that theater's fun. When I was in my late teens, I had an experience that changed my life. It took place at the Stratford Festival as I watched a production of Shakespeare's play Love's Labour's Lost at the Festival Theatre. And I was seated in the less expensive seats in the balcony along the side, so I could see the stage in front of me, but I could also see all the audience watching the stage. You see, the initial and the lasting achievement of the festival and the extraordinary service that it brings to the plays is architectural. In 1953, for the first time since Shakespeare's day, the story, the actors, and the text were once again, in Stratford, Ontario, placed in the heart of the audience in a configuration like this. By bringing together a modern version of the Elizabethan stagehouse with a Greek amphitheater, the words of Shakespeare could be spoken simply because the actors were very close to the audience, so they didn't have to declaim or gesticulate wildly. They could just be quite simple, be themselves. And this pared down aesthetic, this minimalism in performance, made Shakespeare modern again. In Stratford, Ontario, in 1953, truly Shakespeare became once again, in the words of Jan Kott, our contemporary. On that afternoon in August, some 40 years ago, when I was sitting in the theater, I was watching a play about 4 young men who were about to become adults as they resolved to do the right thing, stay together, secluded from society, determined to study and to avoid sex and love and fun. And I knew instantly this wasn't going to end well. And it doesn't. And I recognized my own school friends on that stage. Yeah, I could recognize, the sensitive one, the smart aleck, the buffoon, the one with rough edges. But this play, it was written, almost 400 years before I was watching it. How could that be? The story was delightful. The actors were unforgettable. And while I didn't know it on that afternoon, many of them would become important figures in my life, like Martha Henry, Richard Manette. I found myself drawn to the beauty of that piece, the wit, as well as the autumnal sadness of the ending. And in a moment that I will never forget, it seemed when the couples it seems like they were finally going to get together, and they're interrupted by death. Imagine testing your comedy with death at the end, how brave that is as a writer. They're about to come together, and suddenly a messenger comes and says the father of one of the young ladies, the Princess of France, has died. And therefore, Judy calls, her heart is broken, she has to leave. There'll be no marriages today. She needs to start a year of mourning and then a new life altogether. Youthful romance is over, and adult responsibilities have taken its place. And in a brilliantly theatrical moment, a meta-theatrical moment, one of the young men is consoling the other by saying, look, buck up, it's going to be fine, time will pass, and a year of mourning will go by, and then we'll be with our loved ones again. And he says it this way. He says, come, sir, it wants but a year and a day. And his friend answers, that's too long for a play. Well, that response, a character not only acknowledging their own fears and sadness, but also saying, we are all performing here in front of an audience. We are figures in fiction in front of a live audience. It blew my mind. I mean, this is hundreds of years before Pirandello. It was funny, and it was painful, and it was accepting of the ritual that we were all engaged in. And that afternoon, on that very special afternoon, I was laughing along with 2,000 other people at a play that was almost 400 years old, that reflected my life as a high school student. I felt connected back in time as if someone hundreds of years before anticipated my life. And I also felt connected with those people, with those thousands of people, as we were all laughing and understanding together. And as we shared in the joy and the sadness and the recognition of our lives on stage. And for the first time in my young life, I was struck by the beauty of humanity, of what it means to be human. And in a flash, I realized that I had to be part of the theater, and I really wanted to be part of the Stratford Festival. So I went home and I told my father, I said, Dad, I'm not going to law school after all. I'm going to be an actor. Yeah, not the happiest day in the Cimolino household. You see, my parents were immigrants, and they had made a lot of sacrifices so that their children could have a better life than they had. So my announcement was really not on plan. And I can still see my father at the kitchen table as he was trying to process this information. And he was struggling to get the words out. He said, Vuoi diventare un artista? You want to become an artist? And the way he said artist, well, it was sort of a combination of pimp and car thief. Sometimes I wonder what he knew. Anyway, now in my household, my sister and I, we had came to the future in education, we had two choices, two options, okay? Option one was we go to university. Option two was death. And so I chose the first and went to the University of Windsor and got a BFA. And my parents didn't live long lives, unfortunately, but they did get to see that I would be able to get by as an actor in that national broadcast of Romeo and Juliet. I think went a long way to allaying their fears for their son. I've been blessed with a life in the theater, working with extraordinary plays, interpreting these brilliant and powerful words the words that Nicholas Pennell spoke of when he said, well, Richard, at least we got to say those words that bring laughter and tears and help build community. Those words that tell us how beautiful it is to be human. So I invite you to come see a play, bring a friend, and share the delight that is theater, where we all come together, as 'twere, to hold a mirror up to nature. Thank you. Thank you. Undeserved, but very kind. Thanks.
Thank you. We do have some time for questions. There are 2 mics set up in the front here, and if people can make their way to it, we'll alternate between them if you have any questions.
So one thing I really liked about your talk was the fact that theater encourages us to feel comfortable with uncertainty. But I find that a lot of people in our world that haven't already embraced theater still feel like theater writ large is pretentious and trying to tell us what to believe and how to think. So how do we attract those audiences to the theater? How do you attract new audiences to Stratford? To show people that it is about embracing uncertainty.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. You know, you can spend a lifetime with a person, and over the breakfast table, you may think you know what she's thinking or he's thinking, but you're not sure, right? Good plays do not tell you. Like, there's some writers who tell you exactly what everybody's thinking. And sometimes in some formats, like a novel, that's more usual, right? There's some playwrights who do this, and it's very annoying, George Bernard Shaw. Did I say that? Oh, sorry. But a good writer, you're not sure. You're not sure. You're not really sure of the motivations. Even when the character says something to you, they could be lying. People could be lying about them. Just like life, we aren't sure. It reflects our existence. We are not sure of anything, really. We just construct these fictions to bolster our belief system, because we would crumble if they, came apart. So I try to choose plays that speak to the heart. So in presenting 1939, and I want to thank the department here for having the writers, Janny Lozon, Caitlin Riordan, from 1939, a play that takes place in a residential school. And we've workshopped this for quite a few years. With the discovery of the graves, I thought, oh, how do we ever present this? But the writers who had worked with associations of residential school survivors wanted to tell a story of these kids triumphing, overcoming the horrors that were there. It's a beautiful play. It's very moving. It doesn't tell you what to think. It doesn't, so there are works of art. The most effective ones are the ones that really just help you feel for someone else. The degree to which they start telling you things that you're supposed to believe is when you tune out, right? And I think we're in a very delicate moment right now. I assume you're involved in the theater? Person who asked? Yeah. I think it's a really delicate moment. I think we have a real responsibility to put on good plays right now. Because there are people coming back to the theater after not having been there for years, and if their first experience back is dreadful, I think we're gonna have some choppy water for a while. So I think we have to do our part by not getting too heady. Of course, we need to think and have smart plays. But the most important thing is just be honest and talk to people from the heart. And if we do those plays, then I think we have a chance to bring some more converts in the years ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to have a hard time articulating this, but you made a very powerful argument for theater having a special place in terms of helping us understand ourselves together and as a community and going through something as a community. And you didn't mention the other thing that children do together, dance and music. And I'm just thinking, can you say anything about what we share when we go and we experience dance and music as an audience, you know? And I mean, because you made it such a powerful pitch for the word and play, so.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Remember, I said I didn't dwell enough on the fun, but look, I'm a word monger, so that's where I live. But there is, of course, an important element of the joy of dance, rhythm, movement, and they are other ways into the human heart. Many of you, will know that music is the way that you're brought to tears, that you begin to feel things or you're transported to another area. Or dance can do that. And there's rhythm embedded in these plays. Shakespeare's plays mostly have iambic pentameter throughout. Even his prose, of course, has a rhythm of its own. And they're there in a secret kind of way, When Lear comes out at the end, he says 5 nevers. Never, 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 never. That she's never going to come back. And there's 5. It's really interesting. His 4-line words sentences are also powerful. They come up too. They have this bass note quality to them. And that's true too. This is about rhythm. Lear says 5 nevers, but again, the 4 monosyllables, he only says 4 howls. It gets to what you're talking about, which is there is a joy and a beauty to movement, dance, and music. But all of these art forms are interconnected. The movement on a stage will also inform how you feel, as well as the rhythm of the language. So it's really all of a piece. I'm just we all have our interests, and that's where I'm kind of at. But you're absolutely right. That's the other thing about the arts and music. Yes?
Well, thank you. I thought you'd have something insightful to say about it.
I'm sorry. No. Yeah?
Do you have, any advice for students or people who want to go into professional theater? Hint, me.
Well, I'd say if you want to go into professional theater, you must go into professional theater, okay? It's tough, but I think it's harder to be a chef. It's a tough way to live because there's a lot of disappointment. But if it's what makes you happy, I think you've got to do it. And don't be put off by not succeeding at first. Like everybody, usually you have a long time when you fail, when you just can't, and you learn from that, and it makes you stronger, and it makes you more resolved. Right? Also, don't only do one thing in the theater. Try different things. A good actor is also probably has something to say as a playwright. You may find that you can help backstage or in technical elements, that you're a good designer. So, and all of that helps. That you may find yourself working in one capacity and then doing another. Theater is powerful because it can't be done by one person. You can be a great painter and you can put your painting in the closet and it's discovered 300 years later and they declare your genius. This cannot happen in the theater. Very few examples of, very few, Godot, there's very few examples of when something was not a success in the moment where it became a success afterwards. Because we are all about people together. You, the people you work with, it's a team thing. right? And then it's not even complete then until the audience comes. And so you have to embrace that as the joy of it. It's like, you can't just want to be you in the theater. You got to go, I want to be part of this team. I want to be with everybody on this team. And I want to make change because we're doing something that's worth doing. And then the disappointments will seem less important because you will in some way get to do this. I'm certain of it. And you will also feel satisfaction and family in that pursuit. You know, and that's that ultimately is, you know, why we do everything is if we do it for others. If we're doing it for ourselves, we'll never be happy. So good luck. Break legs.
Thank you for the wonderful talk, first of all. But you mentioned how Shakespeare's theater had been shut down by pandemics and then brought back. Given the current world situation and how theater has been impacted very greatly the past couple of years, was there ever a moment where you doubted its ability to make a return?
Yeah. Those first few months are really, really worrying because I think we all felt that it might last a long time, and it was very devastating in those first few months, right? It was really not good. And so I worried about our ability to get through. And, you know, making theater is never easy, right? I mean, it's hard. And with the thickening of the borders in recent years, with people's changing habits, with their concerns about sitting beside other people, you know, some people are fine and we're getting back, but I think it's going to take a lot longer than we think. I think in the beginning we were hoping that this nightmare will be over and, you know, next year it'll be back to normal. And I think it's probably going to take 4 or 5 years. I mean, this year at the Stratford Festival, we normally have about 500,000 tickets that are sold. Last year we had 38,000 outside in tents. This year will be about 325, 330,000. So it's 60% of the way back. We're budgeting for more next year and after that. But you know, the arts, we receive 5%, only 5% of our funding from government. So our ability to be able to just get through is going to be tested. But this is a wake-up call for all of us because, you know, I think we all thought pandemics were a thing that never happened because most people here were born after 1918. And then when the AIDS crisis happened, it was about a particular group of people and it was sort of resolved. But that was a situation which has been mirrored again. You know, there were people who were made to feel like it was somehow their fault, that they were shunned. We did this in the early days of the pandemic, right? We behave certain ways when these things happen. And now we have the wisdom of knowing that 1918, the 1990s, and now we're part of a way that we deal with something that scares the life out of us. And it's not fair, it's not pretty, but it's part of our story as people. And so this is also part of the story, you know, and I'll wrap up because I know people want to get home. But for the 5 years between 1605 and 1609, for 1604, I think the theaters were only open for about 3 months. Like there was a lot of, you know, interruption of it. So let's just pray that, but today we have vaccines. Today we have public health protocols. Today we have the ability to act rationally. So we should do that.
I'll call on Mary Hardy, acting president of the Faculty Association, to do concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. I am the understudy and, like most understudies, thrilled to be here. A couple of months ago, I found myself in the amazing new Tom Patterson Theatre, transported by a riveting, thrilling, relevant, and real production of Richard III. And at the end, with the rest of a packed house, I leapt to my feet, cheering, applauding, wanting desperately to convey my appreciation to the actors for what they had given us. And I realized in that moment that tears were streaming down my face. And your talk has helped me understand that response. It was a response of hard truths and formal beauty. It was a response of being, for the first time in so long, in a collective endeavor and experiencing something with other humans that really only humans can experience and share, that human connection. So it's a very personal pleasure to be the person to thank you for this talk and for helping me to understand that response, and for, in a way, mirroring your response to Love's Labour's Lost as a teenager. And I think now I should give up my day job and try for the theatre. So thank you very much. Thank you very much on behalf of the Waterloo community for this talk, and also for everything that Stratford has done for our community. Certainly, every time we try to hire someone, one of the things we tell them about the quality of life in Waterloo is this amazing festival down the road. But also on behalf of myself and all the introverts, for getting us out of the house, for putting that mirror up to nature, and for using the arts, the artificial, the artifice to drag us out of our houses and into the real world. Thank you very much.